so basically the way the government looks at it is they have a formula. The government has a formula where they look at, you know, what your income is and how many people live in the house. And if you're under, I think basically in order to get any kind of assistance from the government, you know, if there are 2 people in a family, you have to make less than $700 and I want to say $90, which is not very much money. But if you make over $790, then you don't, then and there are 2 of you in the family, then that's how they define poverty. And to me, that's a little bit low because, you know, certainly, you know, I can't imagine one person living on $790 a month, much less 2 people, but that's how they define it. And it goes up from there in small increments. And then, so if you make under the $700, then you're allowed some sort of assistance, i.e. food stamps, Medicaid, or Medicare, depending on how old you are, you know, CHIP, which is the children's insurance and things like that. But basically, they review you monthly to see if that income increases at all. So that's the government's definition of poverty. You know, my definition of poverty is, are you surviving, you know, with the basic, you know, the basic creature comforts? Can you afford to have, you know, a home or an apartment? Can you afford to pay for food? Can you have health insurance? Can you take care of your children if you have them? Can you be able to get them to and from school? You know, so anything under those basic things. I mean, you know, can you take care of yourself? You know, can you pay for your medications? If you can't do those things, then I define you as, you know, being, you know, in the class of people that would be considered, you know, having severe financial problems or being, you know, in poverty.
With so much wealth in the world, why do you think there is still so much poverty?
Well, I think that that it's back to that, you know, 98.2% rule is 98% of the people, or 2% of the people, you know, have the most amount of money, and they have power over the other 98%. And, you know, so there's an imbalance of money. And, you know, certainly those 2%, a lot of them do give to charities and do things. A lot of times I wonder whether, you know, some people certainly do that because they are concerned and they care. Other people do it because they get a tax deduction off of it. But they do give, but there's an imbalance in money. And so, I mean, so yes, I mean, we are very, very wealthy. And 2% of the amount of people in the United States looks like a lot, but when you look at 98% of people who are struggling can't afford the basic creature comforts. I'm not talking about that they want to drive, you know, an expensive car, or they want to have, I mean, they're just trying to feed their families and trying to pay their bills. And, you know, so I think that's what the problem is. Yes, we're a very wealthy country, but we're also a country that is, you know, that is very, yes, we're a very wealthy country, but a lot of people are very selfish with their wealth.
So does America still have poverty, or is it just third world countries?
Oh my God, America has more poverty in a lot of ways. I think when we see pictures of children in Africa that have distended bellies because they can't eat, and it's so widespread. I said that looks like a more dramatic view of poverty. But the United States, especially with, you know, the economy from, you know, that we were left with in the last administration, we're in terrible shape. I mean, our you know, people have lost jobs, and with losing jobs, that means they're losing health insurance, or they have to go on COBRA, which is twice as expensive as normal health insurance. And, you know, people are going into bankruptcy. The majority of people going into bankruptcy right now are not going out spending things on fur coats and expensive cars and you know, leather pants. They're going into bankruptcy because they've had a medical crisis. I mean, the last things that I looked at were most people are one paycheck away from bankruptcy because they've been forced to live off of credit cards because they've either lost a job or, you know, they're on hiatus from a job or there's an illness. I mean, a lot of people are not prepared for, they think, oh, I have health insurance. If someone gets sick, I'm covered. What they don't understand is that even if your health insurance says, oh, we'll pay 80% of this illness. If you have an illness that costs you $100,000, which is on the low side if you're looking at some catastrophic illness like cancer or a lot of chronic illnesses, you know, you're suddenly owing $20,000 to a hospital. You know, or not to mention the medications that they find a way to, you know, not pay. And suddenly you're looking at $100,000 in debt. And there are very few people that can write a check for $100,000. They're not prepared for that. They don't have that much in savings.
So, do you happen to know the percentage of people in poverty in the state?
No, I do not.
What about in our country?
No, I do not. Because I think those numbers are, I wonder if those numbers are skewed. Because I think a lot, I don't know what they base them on. My sense is they may base them on how many people are going in for assistance. But I know that in my own situation, when I needed to go in for assistance, I didn't know that there was anyone that would help me. And yes, I am the face of poverty. I have had to go on food stamps. I had to get on Medicaid, which is, by the way, very, very good insurance, by the way. But and as soon as it was only because I was making, you know, we were making less than $790 a month. And as soon as I made, you know, got $15 over that, they threw me out of every single system. So at $800, I was no longer getting food stamps. I was no longer getting any assistance, and my rent was $875. So you do the math.
So, I'm going to read you a quote, and you can tell me how you interpret it. My poverty is not complete. It lacks me.
Well, I know I should be able to wrap my head around that, but I don't know.
So, what do you think is the solution for poverty?
Well, it's certainly not giving tax cuts to the rich to, you know, help stir the economy. I think the first step of dealing with poverty is acknowledging it and looking at, you know, who is the face of poverty. That it's not, I think people seem to think that the impoverished people are, you know, people that came into this country do that. I mean, you see people walking downtown, and I mean, I know when the Democratic Convention came, there was a lot of hoopla about a lot of homeless people that were on the streets, and they wanted them out because they didn't want anyone to see that because they were living, you know, on the sidewalk or on the street, and they kind of relocated them during that time period because they knew there would be a lot of cameras. Because we don't want to look at that. We don't want to look at the person who's on the street because we don't want to think, what is their story? It's easier to say, well, they're, you know, they chose this, or they're sick or screwed up. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, they may have just lost a job and they got, you know, they had a lot of bad luck and they were thrown out. So, but in terms of dealing with poverty, it's a multi-step thing. It's first understanding, as I said, who is the face of poverty, getting some really basic numbers on how many people are impoverished. And that's tricky because a lot of people are hiding, they're embarrassed, they don't want to go for help. A lot of us looking at, you know, a lot of the basic issues we have right now, you know, immigration, what are we going to do about that? Because that does have, you know, there used to be a belief that people that were, you know, on food stamps or whatever were just people that didn't want to work, and they'd gotten in the system and they were lazy. Well, personally, I don't know how you live on, you know, $150 of food stamps and survive with children. I mean, that's not very much money. But the majority of people that are considered poverty-stricken that are on food stamps are female head of households. And so you've got women who've been abandoned by their spouses, who have multiple children, who have to work multiple jobs and take care of their kids and deal with child care. So that's a dramatic issue that we have to look at, is to say it's not just people that are lazy. It's people that for whatever reason can't work. It's people that are sick that can't work. So we need to deal with the health care crisis, because if, you know, no matter how much money you make, if you're having thousands of dollars worth of bills every month, unless